of me's in the room right now. Okay, so let us begin. It's a few minutes after 3 o'clock. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Erin Larkin, and I am faculty in the Department of World Languages and Literatures at Southern Connecticut State University. I'm so pleased to welcome you to our webinar on gender inclusive language presented by the Italian program. And I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to our former students. I've seen so many of them among our participants, and it's exciting to see you, some of whom I know you've brought your own students as well. We have registrants from, it seems from some of the email addresses around the US, and a particular welcome to our Baylor contingent. I saw a number of students from Baylor. And it seems like from email addresses that some of you are joining us from parts either around the US or even internationally. And I'm curious here, if you're joining us from somewhere outside of the New Haven area, could you drop in the chat where you are from or where you are logging in from at any rate? I would be curious to see that. I see Wake Up Texas. Hello Baylor. Kentucky, Richmond, Kentucky, Wallingford, Connecticut. So near and far, Illinois, Itasca, Illinois. Hello. So this is exciting, and I want to thank the WLL department for making this happen. Hello from the Philippines. That's exciting. It is in the middle of the night there, so really welcome. You get the special medal for coming so far. So the impetus to put this event comes, as it so often does, from our students. I've been part of so many conversations in which colleagues say, a student asked what to do in Italian or French or Spanish when you're uncertain of someone's gender, or they don't identify as one gender, or when you simply want to be more inclusive in a Romance language, as we increasingly want to do in English. So here's where I turn the floor over to our expert, inclusive copywriter, translator, and digital content creator, Alice Orrù. Alice is Italian. She has lived and worked in Barcelona, Spain for 8 years. She has an undergraduate degree in economics from the Università degli Studi di Cagliari in Sardinia, and a master's in economics from the Università degli Studi di Siena in Tuscany. But she has always preferred writing and studying languages to economic theories. In fact, after several years, in addition to Italian and English, she also speaks Spanish and French. After several years of working in digital marketing for Italian companies, in 2015, she started a career in tech and specializes in copywriting, technical translations, and software localization. All the content she writes always has an eye to inclusivity, a topic she studies assiduously, and one that gives her hope for a better world. An active contributor to the WordPress open source community, she frequently speaks about inclusive writing and digital accessibility. So please join me in welcoming Alice to Southern. She's going to speak for a bit, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat. We will reserve some time at the end for reading these questions. And you can also raise your hand during the question and answer if you'd like to ask her questions live too. And finally, if you would like a digital participation certificate emailed to you after the presentation, please indicate that in the chat box with your name and email address.
So thank you, Erin, for your presentation, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. Very happy for this occasion to share something about inclusive language and inclusion in our Romance languages. So let me share my screen. I will present some slides. Could you please tell me if you see the slides? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's start. Dr. Larkin already presented something of me. So just very briefly, my name is Alice Orrù. I'm Italian. I'm a copywriter and technical translator, and I live in Barcelona. I speak Spanish every day and Italian, but also English and French. And here it is. Today, we are going to investigate the debate around gender inclusive language in a few Romance languages, which happen to be the language that I also speak in my everyday life: Italian, Spanish, and French. These three languages are going through right now a big moment of change and evolution towards inclusivity. So here is the lineup of this talk. We're going to briefly define gender inclusive language and what do we mean by it. We'll see what are the main topics leading the debate on gender inclusive language in Italian, French, and Spanish. And for each language, we'll see the main issue raised, a practical example of the use of gender inclusive language, and some sources and reading suggestions to deep dive into the topic. Also, this presentation will be shared to you, so you will have all the slides and the links and references available for your curiosity and deepen the topic. So let's start with the definition of gender inclusive language. What does it mean? Let's assume that in general, inclusive language doesn't just apply to gender, but it's something that touches all aspects of our social lives, such as ethnicity, race, disability, or ageism. So inclusive language is about using words and expressions that do not discriminate against people regardless of their characteristics. In particular, gender inclusive language means speaking and writing in a way that does not discriminate against a particular sex, gender identity, or social gender, and that doesn't perpetuate gender stereotypes. This is also the official definition given by the United Nations. So why should we use gender inclusive language? First of all, because of respect. Gender inclusive language makes people feel welcome and respected. Secondly, because of empathy. Speaking in a gender inclusive way takes into account the emotions, choices, or values of those we speak or write to. And third thing, the impact. The words we choose can change behaviors, habits, opinions. So generally speaking, I'd say that inclusive language is a tool for social transformation. Okay, now that we have a definition, let's jump into our main topic: how inclusive language is used in Romance languages. A quick recap: what are Romance languages? Among them, we can find Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Romanian, Catalan, and other minor languages. But today we will focus on the first three: Italian, Spanish, and French. For Spanish, we will generally analyze the situation in Spain and Latin American countries. So we'll see the debate in the Hispanophone world, let's say. As for French, however, we will focus only on the debate in France and not on the other countries in the world where French is spoken, such as Senegal, Mali, Congo, Canada. There are dozens of countries there where French is spoken as an official country, but the presentation would have been too long to deepen also on those countries. Okay, so I'm sure you know this better than me, English is a natural gender language. This means that nouns are mostly gender neutral and that there are personal pronouns specific for each gender. But on the other hand, Italian, Spanish, and French are grammatical gender languages, where every noun has a grammatical gender and the gender of personal pronouns usually matches the reference noun. Furthermore, Italian, Spanish, and French are also fusional languages. It means that they express various pieces of grammatical information with a single suffix. What does it mean? Let's see some little examples. I took the word friend. In Italian, French, and Spanish, nouns and adjectives use the same suffix to express gender and number. The word friend in Italian is amico. So we can have amica with a final A to express the feminine singular form, or amico with a final O to express the masculine and singular form. Spanish is very similar. It's amiga for feminine singular and amigo for masculine singular. In French, on the other hand, we have the single suffix I to express singular masculine, and IE for feminine singular. So ami feminine singular and ami masculine singular. With just this little suffix says a lot about the noun or the adjectives that we are dealing with. Apart from this grammatical structure, Italian, French, and Spanish also share another important linguistic aspect, the generic masculine. What does it mean? That when we talk about the generic undefined collectivity, like a group made up of people of different genders, identities, we have to necessarily choose one gender suffix. And the grammar in all three languages stipulates that the correct suffix for talking about an undefined collectivity is the masculine. And this is where gender inclusive language comes into play. Because this grammatical rule define man as the gender neutral standard, and it ends up reinforcing an androcentric view of the society. As a consequence, people identifying as women or as non-binary gender identities are grammatically excluded from the standard. And in a few slides, we've seen some examples of it and how we can overcome this issue. So let's move on to the heart of the webinar, the current debate in Italy, Spain, Latin American countries, and France about gender inclusive language. We have seen that our three languages share a grammatical structures that often emphasizes the masculine. And when it comes to gender inclusive language, one of the first challenges is to avoid the generic masculine. But this is not the only issue. All three languages are facing other important challenges as well. For example, moving away from the male-female gender binary form and trying to find ways to include non-binary gender identities in the language. And this is where I tell you something, we really invite the English singular they so much because it makes things a lot easier. Before we look at how individual languages are addressing these issues in practice, just a little reminder, something important, like there's a noticeable difference in the way Italian, French, and Spanish deal with the evolution of the language. Italian has neither an official grammar nor an official dictionary. This means that lexicographical companies generally work independently of each other. And we have different official dictionaries like the Zingarelli, the Votoli, Treccani, Sabatini, Coletti. And these dictionaries describe the language. On the other hand, French and Spanish speaking countries have specific bodies in charge of the language. In France, we have l'Académie Française. In Spain and Latin America, La Real Academia Española. These bodies are centuries old, and their main function is to give 7 rules to the language. And sometimes they end up having prescriptive power over the language, as we'll see later on. Okay, now we can start the analysis of each language one by one. I'll start with my mother tongue, with Italian. A few days ago, I read an article on the BBC whose title was "The Languages with Built-In Sexism." It was written by Sophia Smith-Gaylor, and it started like this. I like to think of myself as a happy woman. I also like to think of myself as a lover of walking, fairly worldly and easygoing. But to describe myself as any of the above in Italian would be to call myself a woman with loose morals. And that's true. In Italian, we can say un uomo allegro is a happy man. Un passeggiatore is a lover of walking. Un uomo facile is a happy-go-lucky guy. But if we made those adjectives feminine, the meaning transforms. Una donna allegra, una passeggiatrice, una donna facile. Suddenly, all these expressions carry sexual connotations. They are not neutral anymore. So on top of the list of the Italian topics that I put as issues in the Italian debate is raising awareness of sexist language, because this is something Italian-speaking people really have to work on. The second issue is about job titles. The use of the feminine form instead of the generic masculine is still very debated. And third thing, finding a neutral suffix to avoid gender binarism in language. About sexist language, it's worth mentioning that also the Italian media and of course Italian people still have a problem with naming women correctly. It's not just the dictionary that says it. This is a Facebook page called Una donna a caso, a random woman, that each day posts headlines from Italian newspapers that choose not to name women who stand out for some relevant feature news story. And I underline the words in this slide, like ragazza, donna, woman, girl, in red. For example, in the second image, we have an headline that says, in Kosovo, a woman is the new head of state. What's her name of this new head of state? We don't know. It doesn't seem important enough. Or first post in the second line, Tanzania has a new president and she's a woman. Again, we don't know her name. We just know she's a woman, a random one. And this is unfortunately an aspect of sexist communication in Italian that we see all too often in our newspapers. But sexist language is hardly a recent problem. The issue of sexist language towards women was discussed in Parliament as early as 1987 by essayist and linguist Alma Sabatini, who wrote an essay called Il sessismo nella lingua italiana, Sexism in the Italian Language. It was 1987, and the National Commission for Equality and Equal Opportunities between Women and Men entrusted her with the writing of guidelines addressed to schools and school publishers to propose the elimination of gender stereotypes from the language. And Alma Sabatini focuses on the problem of using the generic masculine, but also on the gaps of institutional empower terms never decline to the feminine form. More recently, other guidelines have been drafted, for example, those by Cecilia Robustelli, who is a consultant to the presidency of the Council of Ministers for Gender Language. Her guidelines are named Linee guida per l'utilizzo del genere nel linguaggio amministrativo. They include communication strategies to be used to ensure that women are recognized and valued in the language of the public administration. Despite the many people who study and try to raise awareness of the issue, the debate on sexist language in Italy still polarizes the masses. 2 months ago, for example, the public debate came back on the issue of the feminine form in professional titles. During the Sanremo Festival, one of the most watched musical events on the Italian TV, the orchestra conductor Beatrice Venezzi asked to be called herself male conductor instead of female conductor. According to her, what matters is the talent and the preparation with which one does a certain job. Professions have a precise name, and in my case, she said, it is direttore, conductor, not direttrice, female conductor. But it is a pity that her speech is not supported by the Italian grammar rules. In Italian, the feminine form for job titles exists, and it's totally correct. The list of feminine job titles is very long, and it's not at all wrong to use them. Many of these forms date back to the ancient Latin, which means that our antecedents had already taken into account the double declensions of masculine and feminine for professional names. So why not use them nowadays? Among the essays that have addressed the topic of feminine job titles, we have Donne, Grammatica e Media from Giulia, which is an association of women journalists who wrote a guide on the importance of the use of the feminine form on job titles. The aim is to fill the gaps in the media's use of the Italian language. And a very nice essay called Femminili Singolari by social linguist Vera Geno, who dismantles piece by piece all the linguistic beliefs of the Italian community, tracing its sexist inclination. Let's now see how the generic masculine works in Italian very briefly. This is a quick example. The grammar rule says that to describe the mixed group of people, like an undefined collectivity, nouns and adjectives have to be declined to the masculine form. In the case we have Italian citizens is translated as I cittadini italiani, masculine plural, or university students is gli studenti universitari. As you can imagine, this neutralizing use of the masculine gender has often been perceived as discriminating against people identifying as women or as non-binary gender identities. So what's happening in Italy now? Since a few years, I'd say at least two, we are trying to find new ways to avoid the generic masculine that we call maschile sovraesteso. And here you can see a Facebook post by the social linguist Vera Geno that I mentioned earlier. And she's devoting a lot of her time and energies to nourish the debate in this context. And last year, she wrote this post to start a sort of census of the alternatives people are starting to use to avoid the generic masculine. As you can see, the list is quite long. We have a lot of options, and it includes some of the solutions we'll see next in detail. These are the current most popular gender-neutral solutions to overcome the generic masculine form in Italian. The asterisk, the suffix X, the Y, the U, and finally the schwa. Again, I've used the word friend, amico, for my example. As you can see, the masculine suffix O, which marks the masculine singular, is being substituted by these gender-neutral solutions. Practically, most of them are only used in the written form at the moment. This is also kind of natural since it's way easier to write them instead of pronounce them. The asterisk, for example, is unpronounceable, and this is a big problem in terms of integration in our spoken language. The other forms, the X, the Y, the U, are pronounceable because these vowels are already exist. They exist in our alphabet. But the problem is that they don't mark the number of the noun. That is why they mark the gender neutral suffix, but we lose the indication of the number. For example, for the suffix U, amicu is, okay, it's gender neutral, but is it singular or plural? We can't say. The last solution is the schwa, a sound that English-speaking people should know very well. The schwa is a vowel sound that in Italian doesn't correspond to any phoneme and is not part of our alphabet. But this doesn't mean, however, that we can't write it or pronounce it. Actually, we have a few Italian dialects that already use the vowel sound schwa, the Let's see some practical example of the use of these neutral solutions in social media, for example. The asterisk has been the first and most used solutions for years. This is a recent example of an Italian magazine that uses the asterisk to avoid genderize the word amici. It's highlighted in red. So it's amic with the asterisk. And here you can see an Instagram post by an Italian artist that shows the X as a gender-neutral suffix. So instead of saying tutti, everyone, she uses the X, tutakes. There's not a unique way to pronounce it. It's definitely easier to see it written. And for the schwa, I can say that today this is the most discussed solution. It's not so recent, since the first website to document the use of the schwa as a gender-neutral suffix dates back to 2015. And this site is called italianoinclusivo.it, and it contains a complete documentation of the use case of the schwa in Italian and how it could be implemented in our grammar. It's a convention for now. It's not being accepted by linguists or the academia, by anyone, but it's a very popular solution and very debated, and at least it's very well documented. The schwa has gained so much popularity that last year, in July 2020, an Italian publisher named FQ was the first one to use the schwa in one of their books, Il contrario della solitudine, by Brazilian philosopher Marcia Tiburi. The original essay by Tiburi was written in Portuguese, and it used a gender-neutral form in Portuguese. So the publisher and the Italian translator wanted to respect this original choice and thought that the schwa might be the best solution to do that in Italian. And finally, the most recent case in Italy, Italy is still discussing about this in these days. A few days ago, an Italian city named Castelfranco Emilia decided to start using the schwa in its social media communication. And here you can see, I highlighted in red the word bambini e ragazzi with the gender-neutral suffix schwa, which I would read like bambine e ragazze without marking the final I. So to resume, the Italian debate at the moment is focusing a great deal on these two aspects: overcoming the resistance against the use of the feminine in professional titles, and finding a gender-neutral suffix that goes beyond gender binarism. And it seems that the schwa is getting the better of it. Okay, now we can switch to the French debate. If you don't have questions, I can keep talking and maybe we'll see questions at the end. Okay. Okay, about French, the issue being addressed in France are not dissimilar to the Italian, but they take on different forms and tones. Here, the debate is still very polarized about gender language in terms of giving equal weight to the feminine and the masculine forms. The first point, in fact, is to debate inclusive writing techniques that manage to give equal visibility to men and women in a sentence. Then there is the attempt to raise awareness about sexist use of the language. And finally, but still in a rather niche position, the discourse of gender-neutral suffixes. Even in France, the debate over inclusive language has been hovering for several years now. This is a 2014 document from the Haut Conseil à l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes et les hommes. The Haut Conseil is a government institution created in 2013 to stimulate debate about gender equality and how to achieve it. And with this document, the government aimed to present the Council's policies, analyze the state of gender inequality in different sectors of the society, and propose solutions. And among the many proposals, there are also those for an inclusive language free from gender stereotypes. And the section of this on this topic is introduced with this sentence: language reflects culture. The history of the French language shows us that words like grammar are marked by inequalities between women and men. Thus, a language that makes women invisible is the mark of a society in which women have a secondary role. What is interesting about the French debate is that it's very well documented also through the efforts of renowned institutions such as the United Nations. On the United Nations website, if you choose the French language on the top, you can find an extensive section dedicated to inclusive language. And I've put the link here at the bottom of the slides. So let's look at some of the solutions suggested by the United Nations guidelines for speaking an inclusive French. For example, use correct titles and pronouns to avoid stereotypes, discriminatory or negative expressions. So instead of saying le professeur Jacques Benveniste et Marion ont assisté à la conférence, where the woman in the sentence, la journaliste Marion, is not marked with their profession title, we should say le professeur Jacques Benveniste et la journaliste Marion Dupré ont assisté à la conférence. So let's remind to specify the qualification also for the woman in the sentence, not only for the man. Another example, make gender visible if the context is right. This suggestion is widely accepted also by the French public, and it is based on using the double form with masculine and feminine together, les candidats et les candidates. But also make a good use of the gender form for job titles, as we also saw for Italian. Another good way to use inclusive French is with epicene words. We have the same in Italian and Spanish as well. Epicene words are very helpful because they can be used in both masculine and feminine forms without variation, so the word stays the same. Of course, the tricky part is that sometimes they might need an article to mark the gender. Here you have some examples of epicene nouns and adjectives in French. For example, the word journalist, le journaliste in French, is not marking the gender by itself, but inside some sentences, it might need an article. La journaliste for the feminine and le journaliste for les masculines. Another important part of the French debate is how to write inclusive language, how to strategies of inclusive writing. French people are proving to be very creative, at least as much as Italians, in finding new strategic solutions for inclusive languages. Here we have the 4 most popular writing conventions. The slash, to include in the same sentence the masculine slash the feminine form. The parenthesis, with the same coexisting scope of masculine and feminine at the same time. The dot, to separate the masculine and the feminine form while including them all together in the same word, and the middle dot with the same function. As you can see, the main efforts of inclusive language solutions in French are mostly aimed at finding a solution that makes the 2 forms coexist, the feminine and the masculine, in order to give them equal weight. And are these solutions succeeding? Well, they've certainly been getting used for a few years now. For example, Éditions Nattier is a publisher that in 2017 published the first textbook using inclusive writing. And this textbook was intended for elementary school students. They chose to use inclusive writing only for the names of professions, titles, ranks, and functions. And the textbook also reproduced the 3 recommendations of the Haut Conseil that we saw a few slides back. That is, ensuring that the number of women and men presented is always balanced as much as possible. Include both feminine and masculine in the writing using the dot, as in this case, highlighted in red. Use alphabetical order when listing identical terms in the feminine and masculine, so as not to systematically put the masculine first. And what about the neutral forms? So far, we have seen how inclusive French has focused primarily on the binaries between feminine and masculine, trying to achieve an equal balance between the 2. Gender neutral forms are also being discussed, but more within a niche so far. And now we will see what these proposals are for the formation of a more or less neutral suffix. I say more or less for a specific reason. These 3 examples show which way they are trying to get this neutral suffix. For example, the 3rd person plural pronoun, the equivalent of they, which is normally il for the masculine and elle for the feminine, in a gender neutral form could become yel, like a fusion. The feminine and masculine forms are fusion together. Or the word everyone, tous in masculine, tout feminine, become toustes. I don't know how really they are pronouncing it, but this is the form. Or the demonstrative pronoun se, masculine, and celle, feminine, becomes cele. Sorry.
You're still muted.
Sorry, I was saying my throat is a bit dry. So it is clear that also in this neutral form comes from a fusion of male and female binarism. For this reason, the gender neutral forms are receiving some criticism as they are not considered truly neutral. On the web, however, we can find several examples of much more impactful alternative proposal that really change the morphology of words to achieve a gender neutral form. Sorry, I have to take a few seconds because I'm sorry.
Please, please.
I'm really sorry.
No, I'm sitting here and it's interesting kind of imagining how one might pronounce some of these.
It's difficult.
It takes a few minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So on the web, in reality, we can find several examples of much more impactful alternative. And these are, for example, 3 proposals. Sources are always listed at the bottom of the slide. For example, the letters X and Z could become a new neutral suffix where the X is the singular and Z the plural, like here for the word assistant. In reality, the use of the morpheme Z was reactivated by linguist Céline Labrosse in 1996 in a book of hers, and it comes from the Middle Ages. The letter Z was then used in Middle Age to mark the plural of adjectives associated to nouns on different. Can you hear me?
Now, yes. Yes.
And finally, the morpheme E, which existed in Latin and Old French, and it's now used by a very niche part of the activist community and by some online magazines like Simone, the one that is linked above. And it's mainly used with words that end with an E, like deputy, député. And then we have this neutral pronoun proposed by linguist Alferat, who in 2018 wrote this book, La grammaire du français inclusif, the grammar of inclusive French. And according to this linguist, inclusive French, as we can conceive it today, is not sufficient, because apart from the use of epicene words or gender invariant words, it is clear that the most widespread forms of the French language are not satisfactory from the point of view of non-binarity. And that's why the linguist Alferraz came up with a brand new pronoun, al for the singular and al for the plural. You can see in this table, the third and fourth column is her proposition about this, the declension of this new pronoun in French. But while gathering material for this webinar, I actually couldn't find any websites or texts using the pronoun. It appeared especially in very niche blogs dealing with LGBTI issues, but it doesn't seem to have caught in on the mainstream language yet. The examples of inclusive language I found on websites with large audiences adopt mainly the dot or the middle dot technique. And this is, for example, the webpage of the French WordPress community, which, as you can see, refers to developers and creators as développeuses and créatrices, with the middle dot technique. This instead is the job offers page of the company Canal+, one of the most famous premium television channels in France. They opt for either the dot or the parentheses, both of them in the same page. Okay, now that we've covered Italy and France, let's switch to Spanish. As I said at the beginning, we are going to see the debate in Spain and Latin American countries. And making a complete report for each Latin American country would, of course, have been very long, because each country, while having points in common, also follows its own linguistic dynamics behind the influence of political and social events. There are indeed some Latin American countries where the debate around inclusive language is more intense, such as Argentina or Mexico. So despite the different facets of the debate between Spain and Latin America, we can identify two strong points: the effort to find a neutral suffix to avoid the masculine feminine forms, and raise awareness of sexist language. When talking about inclusive language in Spanish, I always like to start from this statement from the Real Academia Española, which is abbreviated as RAE. As we've seen at the beginning, the Real Academia Española is Spain's official royal institution with a mission to ensure the stability of the Spanish language. They're based in Madrid. They are affiliated with national language academies in 22 other Hispanophone nations. And contrary to the Académie Française, the French Academia, the Real Academia Española is very active on social media, and they reply to people's doubts about Spanish. In 2019, they were asked if inclusive language would become official someday, and their response was the following: this institution doesn't endorse the so-called inclusive language, which involves artificially altering the functioning of gender morphology in Spanish under the subjective premise that the use of the generic masculine makes women invisible. Well, quite a strong statement, I guess, right? Despite the Real Academia rigid stance, the debate over inclusive language in Spanish is very dynamic, even at the institutional level. In fact, last year, the Spanish government commissioned a report from the Real Academia to assess the use of inclusive language in the Constitution. Again, the Real Academia determined that the Spanish Constitution is grammatically impeccable. And in this slide, you can also download the full report. But the good news is that other very important institutions are promoting the use of inclusive Spanish, as we've seen for French. Also, the United Nations website have a section dedicated to the use of inclusive Spanish. The recommendation listed in this page are the same that are being more frequently followed also on a political level in Spain. If you go on the website, you can see the full list of recommendations. For example, use correct titles and pronouns to avoid stereotypes instead of using gender connotated words like enfermeras, like nurse. Enfermera is nurse, a job title which is usually connoted in the feminine form, and doctor, médico, which is usually connoted in the masculine form. Let's try to use a collective noun like personal sanitario, medical staff. If we invite someone to an event, let's avoid assuming this person have a wife, esposa, but use the word pareja, partner. A solution widely used to avoid failing into the generic masculine is the double form, niños and niñas, little boys and little girls. As for inclusive writing, we have a few typographic strategies very similar to those we already seen in French and Italian. The slash or the parenthesis to include both forms, masculine and feminine, at the same time. And using collective noun is also always a good way to avoid having to conjugate words to the generic masculine, like the citizenry, la ciudadanía, is better than lo ciudadano, or la población mexicana, the Mexican population, is better than los mexicanos, the Mexicans, etc. And what is happening from the perspective of gender neutral suffixes? In Spanish, the choice falls primarily on these three options. The @ sign, which is in Spanish is called la arroba, the letter X, the letter E. And this is how you can write the word child, niño, to avoid the generic masculine form. I won't try to pronounce the first option because the @ sign doesn't have a sound in Spanish. It's just a written convention. And this is also why it's criticized, since it's not useful in oral communication. Then we have niñex with the X and niñe. If we wanted to turn them into the plural form, all we will need to do in this case is adding the final S, like niñes. Here you can see how the X suffix is used on social media. This is the page of a Spanish illustrator that I like. She's called Lola Vendetta. And she's also very focused on gender issues. And so I really like her. And see, this is an example of how she used the word todos. Instead of todos on the masculine form, she used the todex with the X. But what if we want to broaden our gaze? Can we say that these three neutral suffixes are reused in the same way in all Spanish-speaking countries? No, we can't say that, and we have data to say so. I found a very recent report from May 2020, produced by the Fundeu BBVA and the Instituto de Ingeniería del Conocimiento, which is a Spanish research institute. The Fundeu BBVA is a non-profit institution whose main objective is to promote the proper use of Spanish in the media. With this research, these two institutes wanted to assess the use of inclusive suffixes in Spanish-speaking countries. They chose to analyze tweets from Twitter with a tool named Linguo. And analyzed a random sample of 1.8 million tweets from April 3rd to April 23rd, 2020, last year. So the volume of the conversation was of such magnitude that they had to pick a random sample, representing the 10% of the total tweets produced in those days. And to maintain the rigor of the research, data were taken only from accounts that have the country verified by Twitter. So it was really possible to ensure that the location was indeed the one declared. This foundation, Fundeu BBVA, wanted to have more data on the actual use in people's spontaneous speech of the paragrammatical solutions adopted for inclusive Spanish. So they've monitored 4 words: niños, children; nosotros, we, the pronoun; todos, everyone; and ciudadanos, citizens, and their inclusive variants, the at sign, the X, and the E. There were 21 countries involved in the research, including Spain and the United States. Let's get right to the numbers. The most used paragrammatical and gender-neutral suffix is the at sign, with almost 50% of tweets, followed by the X, and finally the E. Here we can see how each inclusive suffix is used in each country. In the US, for example, the at sign wins, but it's closely followed by the X. In Spain, the at sign is still predominant, but the X is gaining more ground. Honduras is the country that uses them the least, with only 27 tweets. Although we must say that every country in the research seems to be using the 3 forms. So all the countries resort to the use of X, E, or at sign, at least in some case, in some of the 4 words studied. Spain, Mexico, and Argentina are the countries using the inclusive suffixes more frequently than any other country. We can see that because of the final total at the end of the bar. Chile, Spain, and Venezuela are the countries which proportionally make more use of the at sign. Argentina, Chile, and Peru are the countries in which the option with X have been documented the most. Argentina, again, Puerto Rico, and Uruguay are the countries for which the study registered the letter E more frequently than others. If we poke around the numbers for the US, we see that there are 700 tweets in Spanish that have been analyzed by the research. That's not a huge number, and certainly the research has its limitation, but I think it's still a pretty interesting data for understanding how inclusive language is used in the US Spanish-speaking Twitter community. So the US reported 780 tweets, where 48% of them were using the at sign, 37 the X, and 15 the E. And what about the word Latinx, which is very used in the US? There is no official history of who came up with this term and how it is devised. The term was first seen online around 2004. It has been used in social media by activists, students, and academics who wanted to advocate for individuals like living non-binary gender identities. It's very used in the US, but what is certain is that it's very confined to the United States. In other Spanish-speaking countries, it's still quite rare to see it used. And I close my analysis of the Spanish debate with 3 readings on the use of inclusive language in politics and a guide to inclusive writing. I think these are very precious resources if you study Spanish and want to really deep dive into the techniques and all the debate going on in Spanish-speaking countries right now. What can we conclude from this intense roundup of information about inclusive language in our 3 Romance languages? The most succinct conclusion I can come up with is that no language is sexist or discriminatory by itself, but it's our use of words that can convey a prejudiced and stereotypical view of reality. So what inclusive languages is trying to do is to get out of these imbalanced and stereotyped vision in order to reshape our thinking and the way we live in our society. So my presentation ends here. Thank you so much for your attention and welcome. So now if you have any questions now, I'll be happy to answer them. And answer all your curiosities, if I can.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Let me start. The first one, Lisa's question about los niños y las niñas.
The alphabetized. Yes, that's also a possibility. Yeah, also too is what French people exactly are focusing a lot on. Try to break out the norm of mentioning the masculine form always before the feminine. So yeah, that certainly could be a solution also to say las niñas in first and los niños later. Could you please put the links on the chat? The links, I guess, of the sources that I cited. I think, I mean, I will share directly the PDF of the presentation, so you can click on all the links and download every web page and records that I mentioned.
Wendy has a question. I'm always curious why Latinx is used so frequently in English when Latin is already completely gender neutral on its own. That's a good point.
Latin, ancient Latin, or the word Latin?
I think the word Latin.
The word Latin. That's true. That's that's an interesting observation. But I guess that the point here in marking the gender neutral is also to make a stand on the importance of race visibility and give voice also to the non-binary gender identity from the Latin community. It's what is happening also in Italian with the schwa. At the moment is not a grammatical solution, but it's a political one. So it's important to, if you want to take a stand on this topic, to use it to mark your position on the topic.
So Tina Chapetta Miller says, it's interesting to me that the U ending for Italian recalls some Southern Italian dialects. Any thoughts on this?
That's perfectly true. For example, I'm from Sardinia, which is an island, and we have our own language and dialect that makes a lot of use of the U suffix at the end of words. And one of the main criticism of the use of the U suffix is actually this one, that is not, it can be easily confused with an Italian dialect from the South. That's why it's used, but yeah, it can still be confounded with dialect. So we prefer to use other options.
Rafael, you have your hand up. Maybe we can alternate.
Yeah, thank you. Alice, very interesting, very fascinating talk. Thank you. Just a couple of comments. First, let me address the Latino and the Latinx. I think the reason for the Latinx is because there is a difference when people talk about Latin as ancient Rome culture and Latino as Latino Americano from Latin America. So when they shorten that one, it's Latino, and because they don't include Americano, it becomes masculine by default. And then people want to correct that by changing the Latino, by making it gender, you know, oriented, right? Latino, Latina. So anyways, I think that's the reason. But also, I was very curious listening to you. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think it's very important as a showing respect and inclusiveness, etc., to try to use a inclusive language. However, language really is not up to academics or to us or to people who make the rules. Not even the Real Academia has the last say in how language is used, right? So I don't know if you have thought about this, but you know, what is the difference between academics trying to push for an inclusive language and the way people, everyday people, use the language? Because it does mean something for the ordinary person, right? when they use a masculine word or a feminine word, etc. So I don't know. I was just thinking about rather than from up to the bottom, what are the reactions from the bottom up to to the top? Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Rafael, for your question. Actually, it will open a new debate and a new webinar. It will be worth a new webinar because the debate, at least in Italy, for example, is very strong on this point. What's happening when the language and evolution of the language is coming from the above to the bottom? Is people really ready to take it and adopt it? For example, I mentioned the example of this city, Italian city, that chose to use the schwa on social media, and people generally didn't take it well because they felt it like it was like an imposition, even if it was only on a Facebook post and not, for example, in the institutional website of the city. So there's always this dichotomy between what the general people think, people outside of the bubble, as I call it, of inclusive language sensibility. So we have to be aware, I think, because I really believe in the power of inclusive language and what it can really change in society and in our way of thinking, in deconstructing our implicit biases. But it's also true that there's a lot of people that don't like the idea of being imposed a new way of speaking and writing, also because it would change not only their way of writing words, but also how they think. So there's a lot to work. There's a lot of work to do on that sense. And in Italian, but also in Spain, for example, which I mean is the country that I live in, so I really feel it closely. All these solutions on gender neutral suffixes and gender neutral languages are coming from the bottom. As we saw, the Real Academia is not at all on board with inclusive language, but the government, for example, they are. Politicians at the moment in the Spanish government are really trying to use it and asking the Real Academia to say something about that. So yeah, there's a balance going on, and I think we'll have to wait a little bit more, maybe a few years, to understand how this solution really can have a grasp on the people and start to be used also on textbooks or grammar. Who knows?
Well, what's interesting, sorry.
No, I was saying, I don't know if I answered your questions or.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah, I agree with you. I was just wondering because I think that an average person, right, might resist to the idea of changing because that's how they see the world. I mean, it's not just about language, it's also about how you perceive inclusiveness, how you perceive the rights of other people, how you perceive even aspects like, sexual and gender fluidity and things like that. So not everybody is already accepting that that these are real categories. So of course they're not gonna use specific language. Well, thank you. You did answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's a really interesting point. What I was thinking before, and I was thinking along the lines of Rafael's comment too, that language is spontaneous, that none of these academic reflections on language are spontaneous. Language changes when there's a social or cultural exigency that it change. And I'm thinking, what does Twitter not have? What do all of these micro blogging platforms where young people are becoming activists? What is it lacking? It's lacking a spoken component. So do we have to, I mean, is Clubhouse, that the fact that Clubhouse is social media and it's spoken, do we have to wait for this? Do we have to wait for this to happen there, where there's some kind of spoken component to the kinds of grassroots and activism, the kinds of discussions that happen on social media? They need to be spoken. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, unless until we don't have like a very, I mean, establish an habit of also speaking inclusive language, I think it will remain a little bit on the theory and not that much in the practice. For example, I use a lot Instagram, and on Instagram, that's where I started to experiment with the schwa in Italian. I use Instagram in Italian, and when I do like spoken stories, you know, stories on Instagram stories by speaking to my followers, I try to use the schwa, but it's super incredibly hard because I mean it's the use and the habit of genderize your words and use the masculine and feminine declension is still a lot easier to do that in writing. But I agree with you. I mean, we really need to start speaking and introduce it in our oral communication to, yeah, before saying that it's really like a new established habit.
Okay, there are other questions. There's one from Betsy Sanz. The Real Academia seems to be very inflexible with how it defines proper Spanish. Who is part of the academia? Is there any chance in your view that their perspective will change?
Oh, okay. The Real Academia is a very old institution. It's like a Real Academia, which means like it reminds of monarchy and the real monarchy institutions that were those authorized to establish a rule for language. So it's made of academics and members of and linguists, people, but they are very, I mean, I wouldn't say, I mean, they're not very young, and for sure they're not really part of the conversation right now, even if they're very active on social media. That's a good thing. I can say the same, for example, for l'Académie Française, the French Academy, which is very similar. It's also very old. I think it was founded in the 15th century, something, 16th century, something like that, as the Real Academia. But the Real Academia at least is willing to talk to people and to better understand what's happening to the language. For now, they are very inflexible, that's true. And who knows, maybe their perspective will change, because when institutions and politicians are asking you questions about what about inclusive language in our constitutions, what about inclusive language in our social way of communicating, also, I mean, in the government, the parliament, maybe there's something really changing. So the Real Academia must take that into account.
This is a good question. Jamie, hi Jamie. In Italian, are there subject pronouns that are used for non-binary folk? For example, if a student would rather not go by lui, lei, what would they use? In English, many people go by they to be more neutral. Would people use loro in Italian?
That's a good question, and a very actual one, because we don't have an answer yet. We are still talking about it, and a lot of Italian people, non-binary people, use they in their, for example, social media bio, their description profile, the description of their profile. They mark the English they, because we don't really have an established convention about what the pronoun should be in Italian. We didn't decide yet. I mean, they didn't decide yet, because I'm a cis woman, so I cannot take this instance for me. But the community is still talking about that. And some of them use loro. I saw it sometimes on Instagram, for example, but it's most common to see they in English. Also because we have to think that it's mainly the very young generation that is starting to come out with these propositions of using gender neutral pronouns. And so they're really used to speak English in their everyday life, like mixing Italian and English is very common. And it's not it's not weird to use they, because everybody will, their friends and their community will understand them. That's more difficult in terms of on a professional level, for example, like establishing your pronouns, gender neutral pronouns in Italian in the office, in your workplace, is still something that people is not used to do. So for now, it stays on a level of social media communication, very informal communication. I hope they will come up with a solution in the future, in the near future, because I think we need it. We need it.
Well, Allison has a similar question. She said, please kindly speak on how to address high school students who wish to be referred to as they, or wish to be addressed as they. Allison doesn't specify which language.
Italian, please.
Oh.
In Italian, yeah, that's the answer. We don't have a way to. So the suggestion that I could give is to ask them if they have a pronoun they identify with, and if maybe they could have come up with their solution. But on a general level, there's not like a unique convention in Italian. It's more probable that they will answer with they. My pronouns even in Italian are they. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jamie, do you have another question? I see your hand up.
I do. I just wanted to touch on that. So if there's a bit of confusion. So if they go by loro, how would the subject verb agreement work? Like, would they just go by the singular, like they, I don't know, preferisce, per esempio, something like that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the other difficulty. Since we don't have a unique pronoun, if we choose loro, we should, to follow the grammar, we should use the declension at the third person plural. So like my name is Alice, it will be mi chiamo, loro sono Alice, which sounds very, very weird because it's completely on the plural, but maybe it's the same problem, the same criticism that you had in English when you started using the singular they. At the beginning, it was maybe sounding a bit weird and like not super correct, but now it's like an established solution. So maybe we'll come up with the same solution in the future also in Italian, if the LGBTI community decide that the pronoun loro is something that that can function, that can work. But yeah, in a general grammar sense, we should decline it the third person plural, as you do in English.
Okay, grazie.
No.
So Holly, hi Holly, how are you? Holly has a question. What are your thoughts on the implications for teachers of these languages? I'm eager to include this information in my instruction with students, but I'm not sure where I would start.
Right. Yeah, I can feel your confusion, because it's a big topic and there's still a lot to be decided and to be like, it's a lot of conventions and different options and propositions, but we don't have a super clear way to follow, at least in Italian and in Spanish as well. I know that the debate in French, for example, is a lot more rigid on the stance that we saw in the slides. But what are suggestions for teachers? I'd say like try to listen, because I feel that most of the things that I learned about inclusive language, especially in Italian and Spanish, I've learned them from the people wanting to use the inclusive language to identify themselves. So listening and try to understand what is the evolution of the language to and how to use it to auto-determine themselves is something really important. I think that teachers nowadays could really make this effort of listening and nourishing the debate with their students to understand what are their preferred solutions and try to come up with possible solutions, starting what are the solutions right now, the propositions, the options that we have in the language. We are still confused as well. So we are just navigating between so many options. And I think that the important thing right now is that at least we are debating it. So we have options, we have debates going on. The important thing is that we try to keep tones peacefully and to discuss this in a very peaceful way, which is something that doesn't happen so often in the Italian debate, for example. It's very polarized. So I hope that at least in schools where teachers and students have more confidence in maybe nourishing some debate, that could be more productive and a more productive way to come up with new solutions. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry. I'm not a teacher, so I'm trying to imagine how I would.
Thank you. It's just, I think you provided so many options with what they are doing with, I teach Italian. I should have said that. So, you know, and I've had this thought to myself many times. I'm like, well, I guess we could use a U, like that's the only vowel left that doesn't have a determination, right? So I like that you actually gave us a visual of the list, and honestly, that's something I would give them and say, what do you guys think about this, right? What sounds right to you? But, you know, and I was discussing with one of my other teachers who was here as well, you know, how we are going to go about this and how we want to start just including the options. I think that's important. Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I also suggest you to have a look at the italianinclusivo.it, that website that I mentioned earlier, because that is a very well documented way to start with the schwa, for example, with the schwa solution. So that's a very well documented solution. So you could maybe start with that one.
And you have a request to please pronounce the schwa.
The schwa is like is a vowel sound without any deformation of the mouth. You just have to come out with a very neutral movement of the mouth.
So tutta.
Tutta.
It sounds Sicilian.
Yeah. Sicilian or Neapolitan in Naples as well. The Neapolitan dialect makes a lot of use of the schwa, of the vowel schwa. Yeah.
There's another question from Matt. Hi, Matt. Has a solution been found in Italian for a gender-neutral personal pronoun like the al in French?
No. We don't have a gender-neutral pronoun yet. As I was saying, people is trying to use the English solution. We like that so much. It makes things a lot easier, but we don't have it yet. So maybe loro, the third personal pronoun in Italian, could work, but I didn't see any. I mean, there's no agreement on this yet. So let's see.
Angela says, a somewhat unrelated question. What do you know if critics of the RAE have academics pushed back against the anachronism of this academy?
I don't know about academics exactly, but I know there are mixed feelings towards the Real Academia, because it's a very old institution and very renowned. I mean, they are also in charge of creating the official Spanish dictionary, so it's very respected. It's a very respected institution. And at the same time, in the bubble of people speaking about inclusive languages, yeah, criticism are arising. But honestly, Angela, I'm sorry, but I don't know about academics. I've never, I tend to think that academy in general is more prone to agree with the Real Academia, but maybe there are also some parts the academics that are investigating the inclusive language topics that maybe would like to have more more modern view on this topic as well from the RAE.
I really like how you laid it out and what Holly sort of reiterated back to you, that these are options and that may be placed in the hands of students. They might see themselves, or who knows, maybe this will evolve in different ways in different countries. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So Lisa makes a good point. I was thinking this myself. If we use the schwa for a noun, the adjectives will still be masculine unless we move to plural adjectives. An example is il mio portafoglio. So,
okay. I think I made a mistake. I didn't explain very well. The use of the schwa is not, we are not going to use it for inanimated objects. So portafogli, which is the wallet, yeah, it has to be, it has to have like a gender, because Italian grammar says that even objects have genders, like il tavolo, the table, il tavolo is masculine, or the moon, la luna, is feminine, but they're not persons. So natural gender for words is not questioned. We are not going to use these gender neutral suffixes for inanimated objects. We are only going to use it for people. So if we are talking about children, women, men, everything, I mean, every type of person, personal noun should use like a gender neutral suffix, and for example, should use the schwa. So in this example, portafogli is not questioned. It will stay like masculine. We have no problems with that. The problem comes with when speaking about people, because that's where the sexism and the stereotypes are affecting the discriminations and in our society.
A comment from Nicole. Hi, Nicole. I love the idea of using social media to show students many examples of these gender neutral options. I think it can sometimes seem intimidating to veer from the norms as non-native speakers, but providing many examples for students should help them see it in action. That's a really
absolutely, Nicole. And I can say that social media is the ground where we are learning the most, because since it's not grammar, we don't have that in textbooks or in other official documents, apart from some publishers that are starting to use these gender neutral suffixes. So social media is really the ground to learn and see in real life how the language is changing. And I think it's a very useful tool for people to understand what are the options and what we can do with our languages.
Is there one in particular? Instagram versus, I don't know, like Tumblr or Twitter? Or
I think for Italian, I'd say Instagram. Yeah, also Italian, Spanish. I mean, the one that I monitored most, Instagram for sure, and maybe Facebook, but not so much. Instagram and Twitter.
Are there any podcasts that you would recommend? Because that is, you know, I see that in the pandemic, some cultures that don't have in which podcasts aren't as popular as in the United States, in the pandemic, they've become popular. I see in Italy how podcasts were never popular and they've exploded in the last year, probably because we long to hear voices in our homes. Yeah. We long to hear unfamiliar voices. And I'm wondering if there are podcasts, because they have that element of language to them, that are examining this.
Yes, it's true that over the last year, we saw a really big rise in podcasts also in Italian. I don't know anyone doing podcasts on inclusive language exactly, but for example, I'm listening to a very good one that talking about race. Italian Black and brown people that speak about race in Italy. It's very interesting. I mean, if you like to hear Italian and to understand also how the racial topics are being discussed, that is a very good one, and it's called Sulla razza. I can write it here in the chat.
Well, it sounds like there is a space for gender inclusive conversation in Spanish, French, and Italian. If you wanted to put together, you would have an audience here. If you wanted to start a podcast, you would have an audience here. Jamie has another question. What are the gender neutral definite indefinite articles to use? For example, if one's partner is non-binary, il fidanzato, la fidanzata, with the schwa.
Yeah, with the schwa. According to this website, italianoinclusivo.it, if we choose to use the schwa, also the article will become el schwa. Instead of il, la, you could directly use le. Try to write it here. Something like this. And then the other thing is that if you want to use inclusive language and avoid these problems of articles and adjectives, etc., you can use other words like partner, for example. We use very much the word partner. It's perfectly accepted, and instead of fidanzato, fidanzata, il partner. En français. Oh, okay, yeah. Inclusive. I'm going to listen to that, to that one. I didn't know it.
Are there any more questions?
Thanks. Reading the comments, and I'm very happy that you enjoyed it.
And I will not make the same mistake of sending everyone my link again, so we can actually tell everyone's names. So sorry about that. This was wonderful. I want to remind everyone, if you would like an e-certificate, to please drop your name and email in the chat box before you leave. Great. Okay. And thank you so much, Alice. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending at this very, very busy time of the semester. Somebody's asking for the PDF. Thank you for everyone who's leaving their email. I will follow up with that in the next couple of days. And Alicia also very kindly said that she would have a handout that I will be forwarding to all of you as well. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. I'm going to hang around just for another moment in case